We would love for you to put those in the chat, to put those in the Q&A, and please join us on Friday for our FAQ. We're going to have several members of our gender-based violence specialized services team join us to answer some commonly asked questions and things that come up at our sessions throughout the week. We're also going to have some spoken word from some of our staff and some other really fun and interactive activities. So we're really excited for that, as well as all of the programming that we have going on throughout the week. Today's webinar and all of our other webinars are going to be recorded, and these will be shared on our website online after the event. And so if you are interested in registering for any of our other events this week or finding a recording of today's session, please visit our website. It's ywcaworks.org /WWV20, and we'll put that link in the chat for you guys to check out yourself. So we're here today to kick off Week Without Violence, which is part of a global movement of YWCAs across the country and around the world to end violence against women and girls. At YWCA, we know that not all violence is recognized equally, and a lot of survivors don't get any recognition at all. And so for more than 20 years, YWCA has set aside 1 week in October, which is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, to celebrate the Week Without Violence. And so we're really glad that you've decided to join us for these online events to share information, stories, advocate, and more with a common goal in mind, that together we can end gender-based violence. We know that gender-based violence is all around us, and what that term refers to is acts of intimidation, control, coercion, and physical and sexual violence that is rooted in strict gender roles and inequity. No one of any gender, race, or age is immune to the harm caused by this form of violence, and it's happening to people that you know, and it often intersects with other forms of oppression like racial and economic injustice. Gender-based violence impacts the lives of countless women and their families across the United States and right here in our community. Women and girls of all ages, all income levels, all racial and ethnic communities, sexual orientations, and religious affiliations experience violence in the form of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, trafficking, stalking, and many more ways. And victims of this violence face a lot of barriers to accessing resources and safety, and particularly women from Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are experiencing disproportionate rates of violence and increased barriers to seeking help. And while many of the experiences of survivors cut across all racial, ethnic, and class lines, due to complex histories with the criminal justice system, with the legal system, with the housing system, with the economic system, with jobs, we know that many survivors have a harder time finding support, particularly from BIPOC communities. And YWCA is the largest network of domestic violence and sexual violence providers in the United States. And we provide direct services that support survivors, and we also advocate for public policies that protect them, hold perpetrators accountable, and really work to eradicate domestic violence, trafficking, and sexual assault. Here in King County, our YWCA is the largest provider of domestic violence services for African American women and girls, and we've been doing this work for a very long time. And today we're going to hear from two of the women who are leading this work and learn a little bit more about gender-based violence and its impact in our community, and some of the ways that YWCA is working to address it. And I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, Patricia Hayden. She is the Chief Program Officer for YWCA Seattle-King Snohomish, and as such, she really understands that services includes partnership with the larger community in order to serve that community. She has been working with YWCA for more than 30 years, and throughout that time, she has really led our efforts to apply the values of race and social justice to all of our services across all of our programs, including our homeless services, domestic violence services, our housing services, children and youth services, and economic empowerment. Patricia is also co-chair of the Seattle Human Services Coalition, a member of the King County Alliance for Human Services Strategy Team, and she has received numerous awards for her work, including the Ron Chisholm Award from the Seattle Human Services Coalition for her anti-racism work with YWCA. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Patricia.
Well, pardon me. Thank you, Kizha. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to actually talk about this very, very important subject, gender-based violence. As Kizha said, gender-based violence affects women across race, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, religion, sexual orientation, as well as geographic boundaries. DV and sexual assault specifically has been particularly harmful within the communities of African ancestry. African American communities suffer more severe injuries and death compared to other racial and ethnic groups as a result of violence. More than 4 in 10 Black women will experience violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And despite this, there are limited culturally based services available for African American women. In order to address the issue of sexual assault and abuse against Black women, it is imperative that we look at the unique barriers faced by African American women on a political, economic, and cultural level. When I joined the YWCA, as Kizha said, 30 years ago, our organization was not providing DV or sexual assault services in the community. There were traditional mainstream DVSA service providers, but they did not necessarily reach our community or provide culturally relative services for African American women or other women of color. Women were housed in shelters, but there were no staff that were people of color or support groups for women of color. And women of color did not feel comfortable sharing their experiences because their experiences were very different than maybe white women's experiences. Out of that, the YWCA approached King County, and we made the case that DV and sexual assault victims were, in fact, I'm sorry, hold on a minute, I'm having some technical problems here. Okay, all right, here we go. So, where was I? When we approached King County and made the case that DV and sexual assault victims in the African American community weren't receiving appropriate services, we also made King County aware that, and they knew this, that abuse was being severely underreported due to the culture of our silence and the lack of support that we received from criminal justice systems or other systems that supported white victims. Out of that effort, we were successful and secured a grant. And this grant was really to focus on community education and to develop services for Black women. So we had a lot of work to do in our communities. We needed to partner with community churches, hospitals, schools, business owners, and other places that Black women gathered. We also worked collaboratively with those traditional organizations that were providing sexual assault and domestic violence. We became a source of referral for those organizations. And every woman that entered our shelter in the Seattle Central District had information about domestic violence and sexual assault, because we knew that family violence was a major cause of women and their families becoming homeless. We also worked with the Seattle Police Department. We were asked to train Seattle police officers, and we worked with the King County Prosecutor's Office about why DV occurred, how it occurred in our communities, and advocated for additional resources. It took about a year or so for us to develop these relationships and establish credibility within our own community and provide education and get the word out so that women would seek services through the YWCA. It was around 1990 when we launched our first support group and educational program, which was explicitly for Black women, and we called it Sister Spirit Series. We love that name because this allowed us to do a variety of things with Black women. And we also wanted to make sure that calling it Sister Spirit Series did not alarm many perpetrators, that we were able to have a half-day session on a Saturday afternoon to bring in speakers, motivational speakers. We were able to have a support group. We provided childcare. We had all kinds of healing kinds of exercises and services so that women could come and feel safe, as well as giving them information about domestic violence and how they could have better safety planning and how they can get resources from each other in the community. And these were held at Phyllis Wheatley, formerly known as YWCA East Cherry. So from that, we started having weekly groups. They were so popular. The first Spirit Series, we must have had about 75, 80 women come. And each month they would come, and this was an incredible success. And then we started to do the support groups just once a month, and women wanted to have them much more often. The women bonded with each other in a very unique way. Women were able to really talk about the things that happened in the dynamics, the most personal things that happened within the dynamics of their family. And they were able to share that with other women that had similar experiences. And so we started meeting every Monday night. And to this day, we continue to meet on Monday nights, although it's on Zoom now. But we were able to come together. It was a potluck. We shared food, we shared song, we shared prayer, and we had conversation. So it was very culturally relative. And for years, the YWCA, Seattle King County, was the only human service organization that provided a culturally competent services for African American women in the state of Washington. So that was quite a claim to fame, to be the only one. And in 2011, like Kizha said, the YWCA won the Ron Chisholm Award, and that was for our anti-racist work by creating an environment where our Black community could come together safely. Once the adult women's group was launched and successful, we formed a partnership with other providers. This was a wonderful collaboration. We had a collaboration with Consejo and Seattle Indian Health Board. So the YWCA, Consejo, and the Seattle Indian Health Board created a peer advocate program where we as adults would train young seniors in high school to actually do education and outreach to their peers in high school. The young people would go in and do presentations. They would meet with their young folks, and they would talk about sexual assault and DV. And if a young person shared that this was an experience that they were having themselves or with their family, that young person would be referred to our adult advocates. If you were African American, you would work with East Cherry. If you were Native American, you would work with the Seattle Indian Board. If you were Latinx, you would work with Consejo. This was so successful that all three of our organizations actually received recognition from the U.S. Attorney General, Janet Reno, at that time. And this was huge. We all received awards. The young people received awards. And there was a big write-up about how the young people had taken on this cause and were so successful in working with their peers. And then later we added children's services. Started working with young kids in the home who were witnesses to domestic violence. We taught these young kids how to call 911, to have a safety name, who they could talk to in their families if in fact they were witnessing domestic violence. Basically how to say stay safe. And these kids were really young. They could be toddlers, young people. As long as they could speak, we would go into their homes and we would talk to their parents and to them about how domestic violence had impacted their lives. We have engaged with many partnering institutions in addressing violence against women. We continue to be advocates in the community, and we serve all women. So you don't just have to be an African American woman to receive services from us, but we do center African American women because we want all women to feel wonderful, beautiful, brave, and bold. So with that being said, I have an opportunity to meet the leader, the true leader of our gender-based violence services, our director, Doris O'Neal. Doris has been with the YWCA for several years. I think Doris has been with us, what, about 15 years now, Doris, or so? And she, 14 years. The time goes by quickly.
It does.
But she has been instrumental in growing the program and ensuring that our services are finely tuned and bringing on new services. So I'm extremely proud and grateful to introduce to you today, Doris O'Neal.
Thank you, Patricia. Good morning, everyone. I'm Doris O'Neal, and this week is really important among all weeks of the Week Without Violence, because it shouldn't just be for a week, it should be always, right? And so when we're talking about our services that Patricia has really laid out there, when I came into the program, we were, I think I started with 2 advocates and shelter advocates. And in working in shelter and working in our community, you know, we noticed that more and more African American women were coming through our services of shelter, unfortunately. And so it was very important that we were culturally relevant and to have people in the chair that look like the people we serve. That was very important. Since that time, our program has grown, as Patricia mentioned, it has grown. We have children's sexual assault, commercial sexual exploitation, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, support groups from Seattle to South King County. We have a DSHS offices that advocates are able to be present in for survivors who come through, who have witnessed family violence. The program at this time, we have, I think, about 17 staff. And it's really important that, you know, we are providing services and looking through the lens of racism and trying to undo that and being there for the people that look like us. And it has been asked often of, you know, why does African American women need to have their own specialized services? And domestic violence affects all. I'm not going to take that away. It affects all, and there are men survivors also. And we do serve men survivors if they're needed. But what we found is understanding the historical trauma of African American women was very important, that we be present to understand that, to be able to support the women in the many different type of traumas that they have experienced, going back from generational trauma, historical trauma, child abuse trauma, sexual assault trauma. And so being able to work with the survivors that we work with and provide those holistic type services has been really important to the people we serve. As we develop more programs, we decided that, you know, our name needed to capture the many programs that we have. And we didn't just have DV anymore. We now had DV, we had sexual assault, and we had commercial sexual exploitation, which is working with survivors who have been in human trafficking or prostitution. And that was the first big project that I took on in becoming the director of this program. And we partner with the city of Seattle. We partner with, you know, OPS and REST. And we have a collaborative to really address the need of survivors who have been in the life. And we'll hear more about that later on this week. But that was one piece that never thought about doing it, but when we realized what the needs were, it became very important in our programming. We also created a project called Survivors First. And FIRST stand for Facilitating Information Referral for Survivors of Trauma. And we'll hear more about that on Wednesday also, along with the King County prosecutor. It has been a pleasure to be a director in this position. And I have to tell people all the time that I love my job. And I love to see survivors moving forward and striving and going from victim to survivor to striver. And we put a lot of work in to make that happen with survivors. As we always say, they are the drivers and we're just the navigator to help them navigate the many systems that they may have to, they experience. So we do understand, abuse among African-American women is underreported, as Patricia stated, and also disproportionate. And so as we understand that survivors, Black women have barriers of getting services, it's like we are trying to put that outreach. When I say we, I'm talking about my team and I. We're really trying to do outreach and connect with those places, because what we hear from so many survivors is that I didn't know anything about an advocate. I didn't know I could receive services. No one ever told me. And that really stuck out for me, that we African-American women don't know unless they're dealing with a system, such as law enforcement, criminal justice system, CPS, educational system, healthcare system. And so our team has had to be an advocate and wear many different hats in our journey with the survivor, from even being able to support them, getting the health care that they need, making sure that CPS is, making sure that we support them when they're dealing with CPS to be able to get the services that they need also. So the many different systems that we understand of that racism is a big part of, and it's very hard sometimes if you don't have a voice. And so we try to support survivors with enhancing their voice, but also supporting them while they are going through the processes of regaining their voice. We support them in so many different ways that even after survivors leave some of our programs, we still hear back from them. And we hear, thank you for being non-judgmental. Thank you for providing me a safe place to be. Thank you for just listening to me and not judging me because of the way my hair may look or my clothes may look or whatever. So we try to really support survivors and meeting them where they're at. And we have come so far. We still have so much work to do. And it continues to, our programs continue to grow. We are looking forward to continuing to grow our program. We're looking forward to continuing to work within our Black community and with all women. As Patricia mentioned, we serve all women, we serve all genders. The gender-based violence, it affects so many in different ways, and different, no matter what your sexual orientation is, no matter what your race is, your ethnicity is, because violence doesn't discriminate. And so it has been a pleasure providing the services that we have provided.
Doris, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Um, there was one thing that Patricia earlier mentioned about how our support groups have currently been moved online in response to COVID, and I was wondering if you could talk at all about some of the ways that the programs have responded to the impact of COVID-19 and just everything that's been going on in our community this year.
Yes, great question, Kizha. COVID-19, it has made people be creative, and it has, we had to really think outside the box on how we would continue services. And so, of course, we had to practice what the CDC put out there, but it still didn't stop us from getting to the survivor. We were still able to connect with them on a telephone. I've seen staff meet them out in the parking lot. We are DV support groups and Sister Circle, Women of Color support group have been launched through Zoom. And the women have been really appreciated because they enjoy their group. And so I got to hear a group that was going on Friday. The women were excited to reconnect with each other and reconnect with their advocate. And we were really kind of weary of the Zoom support group meetings at first, but the more and more we experiment and listen to what other folks had to say about it, it can work, and it is working. We have provided survivors with PPE gear, mask, hand sanitizer, gloves. I mean, the only thing the staff got tickled because I said, okay, you guys, I'm gonna get you some overalls so we can really be protected. Like, we are not wearing overalls. But we had all the gear to keep ourselves safe and to keep the people that we work with safe. And if they didn't have access to masks, like many, we made sure we had some available to support them with practicing what the CDC has put out there for us to do to stay safe from COVID-19.
Doris, I got a question for you. We've seen about 30% increase level of violence since COVID. Can you talk about how people are finding us? Because we do know that situations like COVID is a brewing ground. It's a place that, you know, violence can definitely brew with the isolation. Mm-hmm. How is it that we are staying out front and that people are able to find us? Just talk a little bit about that.
The way people have been able to find us is still the same process of referrals, from self-referrals to agency referrals to DSHS referrals, word of mouth, and us still continuing to be in the forefront, although we may be doing it from a Zoom meeting, most likely, but we continue to provide those services we continue to look for survivors and continue to put our information out there so that they are. And what we have found the increase in since COVID, when it first started, we didn't see the numbers come up that much at first. And I checked around with different DV agencies to kind of see if they were seeing the same thing. And it was a little quiet for the first month or two. Now it has spiked. There has been numerous DV homicide, and unfortunately, those homicides have been women of color. It has now survivors are being with school starting, that made a difference. They were able to have access to, computers. They were able to say, I need to go take the, medical field open back up. Healthcare opened back up. So survivors were being creative themselves on how to get connected with us. And they continue to do so. And now, you know, being in quarantine with someone who's being abusive to you and you cannot get out at this point. So when we're talking to survivors, you know, we're still, safety planning is so much more important right now than ever. Of how do you be safe while you're in the home with the person who is being abusive to you? And the safety planning is huge. And so I think survivors are talking to each other sometimes. You know, they're getting resources from other resources, and they're finding their way to get supportive services. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm. I know that that homelessness is a huge portal for, I'm sorry, the dog in the background. It's a huge portal for survivors and or victims of domestic violence. And we do have uh, uh, emergency shelter housing both in Seattle and throughout King County. And we know that many of those women still continue to connect with Doris's department to, don't we provide a questionnaire or something, just, you know, letting people know that those services are available to them if in fact they themselves need something, and or if their family members need assistance around both sexual assault and domestic violence.
And also, you know, our partnering agencies, DB program, they have been reaching out a lot more recently of, you know, wanting to make sure that they are being culturally competent in the services. And if they don't have the services, they are reaching out to us at this time to see how we can partnership so that we have, so women of color have services that meet their needs, which I really felt that was really great when people were reaching out to ask those questions of how can we help, what can we do? And it's not always easy to answer those questions, but if one takes the time to really ask the question to say, how can we help better serve our African American women in our program, then I was all up to supporting that process. And, you know, we continue to work with our other DBSA program, CSC programs also, to ensure that women are getting the services that they so much deserve. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Doris, and thank you also, Patricia. Do either one of you have anything that you would like to add or leave our audience with today?
I would say please join us this week. We have a really great agenda for the next 4 days, and we look forward to hearing people's questions and being able to answer those on Friday. So thank everyone for joining us today.
Yes, definitely, please. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat today. And if something pops into your mind throughout this week, you can also shoot an email to communications@ywcaworks.org. We will put that email address right there in the chat for you. So feel free to send any questions that we can include in our Freestyle Friday. As Doris mentioned, we have a really great lineup this week, and I hope that this sparked your appetite for some more in-depth discussions about gender-based violence. Tomorrow, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Carolyn West, who is a professor of psychology and a domestic violence expert, and she is going to be giving a keynote presentation called Widening the Lens, Intimate Partner Violence in Black Women. And that one is especially recommended for anybody who is doing this work, who is a service provider or an advocate in the community, to really understand that intersection of oppression and systems of oppression and how we can better serve and better support Black women survivors. On Wednesday, we'll be joined by a representative from the King County Prosecutor's Office, and we will have Doris back to talk with us about Survivors First and highlight how that program has really done some amazing things, and that we would love to see that replicated in other places to support even more survivors. Thursday, you'll hear from more YW staff about all the other programs we have that are helping survivors thrive. And as we already mentioned, Friday is our FAQ. All of these events will be starting at noon, and all the links can be found in the chat. And with that, I would just like to thank everybody one more time. Please follow the hashtag WWV20 on social media, and you will find all of the information, not just from our YWCA, but from all of the YWCAs across the country and around the globe that are participating in this. And this is not just a YWCA movement. We are just leading the discussion this week. So thank you all again for joining us today, and we hope to see you again at one of our next events.
Thank you, Kizha.
Thanks. Bye, ladies.
Bye.